April 24th, 2026. Day 56 of the war. The sea was supposed to be the quiet part, the boring part, the part where everybody pretended logistics were just trucks, cranes, and paperwork with better lighting. Yeah, no, not today. Elena Park was already staring at the board before most people had finished their first coffee. She had that exhausted, razor-clean look of someone who had been living inside a screen for too long, hair pulled back, jaw tight, eyes moving like a radar sweep. The kind of operator who does not waste words because the ocean is already wasting enough of everybody's time. Around her, the command space hummed with that ugly, constant electricity that means something is about to go sideways, and everybody in the room knows it except the people who are about to get hit. And then the picture started to change. Not all at once. That would be too easy, too polite. Instead, 3 separate port feeds began to light up in sequence, each one showing the same ugly pattern in a different costume. One port, then another, then a third. Small movements at first. Cargo handling that looked routine if you were the kind of person who thinks a knife fight is just 2 guys standing close together. But Park was not that kind of person. She saw the spacing. She saw the timing. She saw the way the traffic was being staged, not loaded. She saw the swarm before it became a swarm. That is the thing about a coordinated launch package. It never looks like a launch package until it is already too late. It looks like maintenance. It looks like harbor noise. It looks like a bunch of guys in work clothes pretending they are not building a punch in the dark. Classic gaslighting, honestly. The sea is sitting there acting innocent while the whole board is quietly turning into a trap. By 0600 local time, the first indicators were already stacking up. Park had 3 ports in view, 3 separate streams of activity, and one shared rhythm underneath them all. The same kind of movement, the same kind of delay, the same kind of deliberate, synchronized patience that only shows up when somebody has rehearsed the whole thing enough times to make it look accidental. IRGC units were not improvising. They were assembling. And when the IRGC assembles, it is never because they are feeling spontaneous and creative. It is because somebody has decided to make the problem somebody else's morning. Park zoomed in on the first feed, then the second, then the third, building the picture the way a detective builds a case and a war correspondent builds a headline. One port was feeding small craft into the water. Another was moving launch gear under cover of civilian clutter. The third was the quiet one, which is always the one that should make you nervous. Quiet does not mean empty. Quiet means waiting. Quiet means the people on the other end of the screen think they are being clever. POV, you are the guy in the harbor thinking your little setup is invisible. Meanwhile, Elena Park is already connecting the dots like she is paid by the humiliation. Because she is. Not officially, of course. Officially, she is just tracking maritime threat indicators and updating the operational picture. Unofficially, she is the reason a bad day does not become a catastrophic one. The war had been grinding for 54 days by then, long enough for everybody to get used to the sound of bad news and short enough that nobody had gotten used to surviving it. The region was already raw. Shipping lanes were tense. Air defenses were jumpy. Every radar operator, every watch officer, every exhausted analyst was living in a world where one wrong assumption could turn into a burning hull and a very expensive apology. And the IRGC knew it. That was the whole game. Pressure the sea. Stretch the response. Make everybody react to the wrong thing while the real threat slips through the side door. Park did not bite. At 0617, she flagged the first anomaly. Not a single vessel. Not a random patrol. A coordinated pattern across 3 ports, each one feeding into the same operational tempo. That mattered. A lot. Because isolated movement can be noise. Coordinated movement is intent. And intent is where the bodies start piling up. The first port was moving fastest, which usually means it wants attention. The second was more disciplined, almost boring in its precision. The third was the one that made Park's stomach tighten. It was too clean, too controlled, too little visible activity for a place that should have been noisy if it were truly idle. That kind of silence is not peace. It is concealment with better branding. She called it out, clipped and flat. No drama in her voice, because drama is for people who are not trying to keep ships alive. The board lit up with markers, tracks, estimated launch windows, and probable routes. The picture sharpened. The swarm was not just forming. It was being shaped. 3 ports, 1 choreography. A coordinated IRGC maritime push designed to overwhelm attention, split response, and force defenders to guess wrong under pressure. And that is where the whole thing gets nasty. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Every innocent-looking tug, every crane swing, every delay in the harbor starts to look like a setup. Every minute matters. Every update matters. The clock is not ticking politely anymore. It is sprinting. Park leaned closer to the display, eyes flicking across the feeds, already tracking the threat as it spread from port to port like a stain in water. She was not waiting for confirmation from some committee of nervous adults to tell her what her own eyes already knew. She had the shape of it now. The ports were not separate. They were pieces, and the pieces were moving. 3 ports, 1 trap, and Park sees it first. By 0620, the warning had gone from suspicious to screaming. Park was no longer looking at a vague maritime nuisance. She was staring at a launch package. 31 fast attack craft, moving with the kind of discipline that only comes from rehearsal, were now surging toward the strait like somebody had kicked over a hornet nest and told the hornets to form up in columns. The strait is narrow, crowded, and unforgiving. Once a swarm gets into that lane, it stops being a theory and starts being a knife fight in a hallway. Park pushed the track update across the board, but the room was already doing that classic bureaucratic thing where reality arrives first and approval shows up later wearing a tie. Gonzalez saw it. Bulkley saw it. Nitsa saw it. It did not. The craft came in fast, low, and ugly, each one throwing a wake like a white scar across dark water. Some were armed. Some were decoys. Gonzalez took the first hard turn into the fight, her sensors snapping from search to track as contacts multiplied across the screen. Bulkley shifted to cover the flank, trying to keep the swarm from slipping around the edge like a thief in a crowded market. Nitsa stayed farther out, the heavy hitter, the one expected to absorb the worst of it and keep the line from collapsing. 3 ships, 3 jobs, 1 ugly problem. Classic split fight. The kind of setup that looks manageable on paper right up until the paper catches fire. It is like trying to swat 31 mosquitoes with 3 hands while somebody keeps turning off the lights. Real classy, real efficient, real murderous. At 0623, the first missiles came off the rails. The defenders had to choose. Engage the inbound missiles or keep pressure on the boats. Gonzalez lit up first. Her weapons systems snapped into action, and the ship began throwing steel at the sky with the cold confidence of a machine that had done this before. The missiles climbed, arced, and went hunting. Somewhere out over the water, 1 fast craft vanished in a flash and a column of spray. Another kept coming. Another veered hard, trying to break the firing solution. The swarm was already adapting. Of course it was. These people did not drive into a kill zone by accident. They came in expecting blood. Bulkley was next. Her crew worked like they had been wired directly into the combat system. Hands moving, voices clipped, every decision shaved down to the bone. Track, classify, engage, re-engage. The screen filled with contacts, then more contacts, then the kind of clutter that makes a watch officer want to start drinking before lunch. 1 boat was destroyed. Another was damaged. A third kept charging through the debris field like it had a personal grudge. And Nitsa, out on the edge of the fight, was getting dragged into the worst kind of problem. Too many targets. Too little time. The ship was burning through interceptors at a pace that would make any ordnance officer start sweating through his shirt. This is where the war stops being cinematic and starts being accounting. Every launch is a receipt. Every empty cell is a future headache. Every second of hesitation is a gift to the enemy. Park watched the pattern tighten. The swarm was not random. It was steering the defenders into a 3-way split, forcing each ship to protect its own patch of water while the larger threat kept sliding through the seams. That was the whole point. Not to smash the fleet in one glorious blow, to make the fleet fragment itself. And because war loves irony the way a shark loves blood, the more the defenders reacted, the more the attackers got what they wanted. At 0626, Gonzalez had to peel off to deal with a fresh missile threat. Bulkley was pinned by fast movers closing from the south. Nitsa was now carrying the heaviest load, and the load was getting heavier by the second. The ship's magazines were not empty yet, but they were no longer comfortable. Comfortable is gone. Comfortable left the building. Now it was just math and nerve. Park leaned into the display, jaw tight, eyes moving faster than the operators around her. She could see the shape of the attack now in full. 31 craft, multiple axes, missile cover, decoys, pressure points. The IRGC was not trying to be clever in a cute little chess club way. They were trying to be brutal. Overwhelm the defenders, split the response, and force a mistake that would open the strait like a zipper. That is when the first real damage report came in. One of the fast craft had gotten close enough to threaten a ship at point-blank range before being shredded. Another had been hit and was dead in the water, burning hard. A third had slipped through long enough to force a defensive turn that exposed the flank of another contact. It was chaos with a plan. The kind of chaos that makes professionals look calm right up until they are not. Gonzalez's crew kept firing. Bulkley kept adjusting. Nitsa kept absorbing. But the swarm kept coming, and every time one piece of the attack was cut down, two more seemed to slide into its place. That is the nightmare. Not one big wave, 100 little ones. Death by 1,000 cuts, except the cuts are moving at speed and carrying explosives. By 0629, Nitsa was running dry. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. Running dry in the way that matters. The ship had burned through enough of its ready weapons that the next few minutes were going to get very expensive, very fast. The combat team could feel it. You can always feel it when the magazine starts thinning out. The tone changes. The voices get tighter. The pauses get shorter. Nobody says the word empty, because saying it out loud makes it real. Park saw it too. And this is where the story turns from bad to forbidden. Because the rules said she was supposed to wait for confirmation, wait for authorization, wait for the proper chain of command to bless the obvious while the enemy kept moving. That is how systems die. Not from lack of information. From too much respect for procedure when the clock is already in the red. Park did not wait. She reached for the restricted channel, the one she was not supposed to touch without clearance, the one that sat behind the polite walls of protocol like a locked door in a burning house. Her hand hovered for half a second. Then she made the move anyway. Forbidden. Necessary. The kind of decision that gets you yelled at later if you survive long enough to be yelled at. At 0629, the strait was still on fire, but the line had not broken. That is the part nobody puts on the glossy briefing slide. The defenders were bleeding ammunition, sweating through their shirts, and staring at screens that looked like a bad day at a casino. But the blockade was still there, still standing, still refusing to fold. Then Park made her move. She punched the restricted channel and sent the kind of fire support request that makes lawyers wake up in a cold sweat. No drama, no speech, just the hard, ugly truth of combat. If the swarm kept pressing, somebody had to hit it in the teeth. And Park knew exactly who had the teeth. Off to the side, Park's support fire came in like a door kicked off its hinges. The round slammed into the attacking craft with brutal precision, not a warning shot, not a polite suggestion, but a full stop. The swarm that had been trying to split the defenders suddenly had to deal with a new problem. It was getting punched from the flank by a ship that had decided it was done being gaslit by the clock. And that changed everything. The attackers had been counting on pressure, on confusion, on the defenders reacting one ship at a time until the whole formation started to fray. Instead, Park's fire broke the rhythm. Fast craft that had been surging forward at speed now had to veer, scatter, and burn precious seconds trying not to become scrap metal. The geometry of the attack collapsed. The neat little murder plan turned into a mess of evasive turns, smoke, and bad decisions. That is what decisive support fire does. It does not just destroy targets. It destroys confidence. On the bridge and in the Combat Information Center, the mood shifted in real time. Voices that had been clipped and tied a minute earlier suddenly had room to breathe. The operators were still working like their hair was on fire, but now they were working with a margin. A tiny one, sure. Not enough to get cute. Not enough to start acting like a Karen in a parking lot, but enough to keep the line intact. Gonzalez, Bulkley, and Nitsa kept hammering away, each ship doing what it could with what it had left. The difference now was that the swarm was no longer dictating the pace. It was reacting. And in naval combat, that is the moment the whole script starts to crack. One by one, the fast attack craft that had been pressing closest either peeled away under fire or went dead in the water. Some were burning, some were drifting, some were simply gone from the picture, erased so fast the radar picture barely had time to admit it. The missile threat that had been hanging over the formation like a bad joke also lost its edge. Without the swarm to force the defenders into bad angles, the remaining threats had less room to work. By 0632, the blockade was still intact. Not perfect, not untouched. Intact. That word matters. Intact means the mission survived the worst the enemy could throw at it. Intact means the strait did not open. Intact means the defenders did not get split, isolated, and picked apart the way the attackers had planned. The IRGC had come in swinging for a decisive break, and instead they ran into a wall that refused to move. The battle was not over yet, but the outcome was starting to show its face. Then came the part that always follows the shooting. The silence after the noise. The ugly little pause where everyone checks the damage, checks the magazines, checks the bodies, and checks their own pulse to make sure they are still in the room. That is when Calloway went looking for Park. He found her where people always find the person who just saved the day and made everybody else look slow. Not smiling, not celebrating, just standing there with that hard, focused look that says the fight may be over, but the paperwork is going to be a nightmare. Her posture was straight, her face unreadable, her eyes still locked on the aftermath like she expected the sea to try something sneaky. Calloway did not waste time. He came at her with the kind of controlled anger that only shows up after a near disaster. Not shouting. Worse, calm. The calm of a man who knows exactly how close the whole thing came to going sideways and wants to know why one person seemed to see it coming before everyone else did. How did you know? He asked. That was the whole question. No fluff, no diplomatic padding, just the blade. Park did not answer right away. She kept her eyes on the display for a beat longer, as if the answer might still be floating there in the wreckage. Around them, the combat center was still alive with clipped reports and damage checks, but the space between Calloway and Park had gone quiet in that dangerous way that means the real fight has moved indoors. Calloway pressed again, because of course he did. This was not a man interested in being gaslit by coincidence. He wanted the source, the warning, the reason she had reached for the restricted channel when she did, and not 30 seconds later when the sea might have already taken the initiative away from them. How did you know the attack was coming? Now the room felt smaller. Because that is the real question, isn't it? Not whether Park was right. She was. Not whether the support fire worked. It did. The question is how she knew enough to move before the rest of the chain of command had finished clearing its throat. Park finally turned to him. No theatrics. No apology. Just that same steady look, the kind that makes people realize they are not dealing with a lucky guess. She had seen something, or heard something, or understood something the others had missed. And whatever it was, it had put her one step ahead of a swarm that had been built to overwhelm everyone else. Calloway held her gaze, waiting. The battle was over, but the real question begins now.